What is up, everyone, and welcome back to the PT³ podcast, where we bring together strength, rehab, and performance. I'm your host, Dr. Nate Karam, physical therapist, strength coach, and the guy who believes your potential goes way beyond what you're currently settling for. This show is all about helping active individuals just like you cut through the noise, train smarter, stay injury-free, and optimize your performance. So whether you're in the gym, on the field, or trying to feel better moving through life, there is absolutely something here for you. Along the way, we'll be bringing in top experts, from physical therapists and strength coaches to athletes, nutritionists, performance specialists, professors, you name it. So you get real evidence-based strategies straight from the best in the game. We'll break down training, injury prevention, rehab, nutrition, all the science behind building a resilient, high-performing body. All in a way that's simple, no BS, and built for busy, driven people who want results. Today's episode, we're going to talk about the next 3 chapters of my online guidebooks that we started with in the previous episode. We're going to be talking about volume versus intensity, finding the right load for the right gain, exercise selection, building the blueprint of your strength, and frequency and recovery, how gains happen between your workouts and within them. So, without further ado, let's get into it. Alright guys, so last episode we talked a lot about what is strength, the SAID principle, and progressive overload. But today we're going to get a little bit more specific into the structure of your workouts. What actually happens when you're working out, and of course when you're not working out in between your workouts. So we're here to talk about some really interesting concepts. Tomorrow, fun fact, is actually the start of my giant sports residency that I'm going to be doing for the next 2 years. So that will take up a lot of my time. But I'm looking forward to keeping up with these podcasts and hopefully meeting people that I can bring on the show within the residency. So I didn't have time to recruit a guest speaker for this episode. It'll just be me. I'm so sorry. You'll have to just hear from me today. So first off, let's start with chapter 4. We'll talk volume versus intensity, right? So finding the right load for the right gain. In the concept of strength training, right, you've got 2 variables. You've got your volume and your intensity. So what is volume? It's the total amount of work that you do. Mathematically, it literally means the amount of sets times the amount of reps times the load. So if you do 3 sets of 10, 10 pounds, well, that's 10 times 10 times 3. So 300, that would be your total volume for that session. And volume basically tracks how much weight you're lifting in total. Not necessarily how difficult anything was or how strenuous or how close to your 1 rep max. No, this is simply how much did you lift. So if you have a very high volume workout, it means that you lifted a lot of weight overall. It could have been not fatiguing at all. You could have spent, for example, like a whole 24-hour day just repeatedly every couple minutes lifting like a 20-pound dumbbell over and over and over doing bicep curls. And you could end up with a volume of 1,000, 10,000, 100,000 pounds, however many you decide to lift. But maybe you never actually fatigued or reached anywhere near your maximum intensity in each bout of movement. It was easy. It was almost like a casual lift. You just did it for a long period of time. So high volume, right? Lots of sets, lots of reps, tons of load. That's going to get you that high volume. Now, intensity, that's different. Intensity is kind of the driver of a lot of our progressive overload rules that we were talking about in the last episode. It's a very easily manipulated variable, but one that doesn't often get manipulated the correct way for optimal results. So intensity is how heavy you go relative to your 1 rep max. If you guys are familiar with what a 1 rep max is, or 1 RM, it's essentially the highest amount of weight that you can lift for 1 repetition. So if you went anywhere over that threshold of higher than the weight that you're lifting, you would fail with that lift, essentially. For example, my 1 rep max on bench, I trained it throughout the years over and over and over using strength programming like we talked about in our specificity of training, but I hit a plateau. And in that plateau, it means I can only lift a 1 rep max of 335 pounds, for example, on bench press. So if I tried 340, I'm going to fail. It's 100% of my capacity, 335 pounds is. So if I go over that capacity, I don't have the capacity to lift anymore. That would be like 105% of my 1 rep max. So when we train in terms of intensity, we program using intensity, we're doing percentages of 1 rep max. So there's lots of different ways to decide to program this depending on your goals. And I'm going to keep tying things back to previous episodes, but we talked about different specificities of training. And I'm going to talk about 3 of them in particular today in relation to volume and intensity. We're going to discuss max strength, hypertrophy, and muscular endurance, which are, I would say, the 3 most common goals. And I want you to understand how you think they might overlap a lot more than they do, but there's little nuances and things that you need to just keep in mind when you're programming for yourself. So first, let's talk about how you manipulate these variables, when you manipulate them, and what actually happens according to NSCA guidelines. Classifying these training goals. So max strength, we're going to talk load, intensity, and volume. All that fun stuff. So if you're training for strength, you want your load to be at or above 85% of that one rep max. All right. So easy way to figure this out. You go to a bench press, right? Find your one rep max. Let's say theoretically in this situation, it's 100 pounds. 100 pounds is your one rep max. All right. Congrats. So now you want to train for strength and you're deciding what load to pick. Well, you would take 85% or more of that one rep max. So 85% of 100, that's 85 pounds, maybe up to 90, 95 pounds, depending on how many reps you're going to go for. And we can talk about that rep to intensity chart later. But for now, what's important is understanding rep range for strength. You're going to be looking at 1 to 6 reps, sets 2 to 6, and then rest time 2 to 5 minutes. So these are kind of the four variables that you need to think about: is loads, reps, sets, and rest. Intensity is definitely the most important variable to manipulate when you're looking at a lot of these concepts of progressive overload. It's the easiest one, the most easy to mess up. So if you're going for a certain training goal, right, like maybe to improve maximal force output, neural drive, like we talked about in the last episode, power potential, you're going to want more strength programming, and you do this by programming specifically for these guidelines. So I'm going to give you an example. An exercise that'd be programmed for strength. You hear this thrown around, a lot. The 5x5 thing for compound lifts, and like we discussed in previous episodes, they're multi-joint lifts, things that involve lots of muscle: bench press, rows, squat, deadlift, overhead press. Talk about that more in the next chapter. Those are your compounds. So you want to start off your workout with a really heavy compound, kind of loaded up for strength. Your goal is to actually strengthen, right? Not muscle hypertrophy. You're not trying to grow your muscles necessarily. You're trying to develop adaptations to get stronger, lift more weight. That's your goal. So that would take 85% or more of your one rep max. And you could program it for a 5x5. That fits within the guidelines. That would get you stronger. You could program a 6x3, 3x4. Any of those variations are going to work strength, as long as that rep and set value is corresponding with strength guidelines. And the load, most importantly, is 85% or more of your one rep max. Now, a big thing we're going to talk about in one of the chapters today is rest time. So I'm not going to dive too deep into that yet, but please, guys, remember rest is important. Rest is arguably more important than the workout itself. If you're not recovering properly, that you're not actually deriving any gains or benefit from that workout that you got in. So rest is essential within your workout and also after your workout. But within that workout, if you're programming for strength, you need to be taking 2 to 5 minutes of rest time between sets. 5 being a little on the high end. I wouldn't wait that long unless you're taking a full on nap. But usually a solid 2 to 3 minutes between a really, really intense strength set, that's going to be solid. All right. Now moving on to hypertrophy. Hypertrophy means muscle growth, right? Stimulus of new muscle tissue, growth of new muscle tissue. So I want to clarify first off that strength and hypertrophy are two very different things. We made a comparison in the last episode, Drew and I, talking about how if you're trying to bench press for a bigger chest, you probably want to be programming for hypertrophy, not for one rep maxing. So one rep maxing, if you think about the guidelines for strength, right, that would be one set of one rep. So pretty close to those max strength guidelines, and it certainly is above 85%, 100% is, because it is your one rep max. So if you're doing one rep max training all the time, like these high schoolers I see in the gym, you're trying to increase that one rep max. You think that big lift, the big bench is going to get your chest bigger. Well, this is scientifically why it's not. This is why we were making fun of that in the last episode. In order to dose for hypertrophy or muscle growth, that's that kind of 8 to 12 rule that I was talking about last time. So if your general goal is just to get bigger, more lean muscle mass, develop your muscles, that 8 to 12 rule is going to serve you very well. If your goal is strength and power output and you're a competitive lifter, I would probably maybe not follow that rule and go more for strength programming. So hypertrophy, right? You're looking for 67 to 85% of your one rep max for hypertrophy for muscle growth. Again, let's take it practical. If I bench 100 pounds as my max, I'm probably going to want to load up around 67 to 85 pounds, somewhere in that range. You can play with it for the 8 to 12 rule, like I taught you. The amount of reps you want to look for is 6 to 12 by guideline, but I like more of that 8 to 12 recommended range. 6, you're leaning a little more into the strength bubble. There tends to be a little bit of overlap down in the bottom of the range. So, sets 3 to 6 with 3 to 4 being recommended. 5 to 6 gets to be a little too much. get onto a little bit of a high volume side of things, too high volume for hypertrophy. And yeah, remember volume, you don't need a ton of volume if the intensity is high. It's a balance game between the two of them. Typically, in a very hypertrophy focused workout, you're going to get a lot of fatigue if you have very, very, very high volume and intensity past the point where it's worth it. You will find you'll fatigue yourself, start seeing diminishing results set by set. So, to recap, 67 to 85% of your one rep max, 6 to 12 repetitions, with 8 to 12 being the recommended, and a rest time of 30 to 90 seconds. I would go with a minute, pick that nice little middle marker. So, for hypertrophy training, you're not using as much neural drive, not as much taxing of the CNS as you would with strength training. So, you don't really need as large of rest times between sets, but you still need to take rest time. All right, guys, please utilize your rest time. And, this is what I was joking about with the patients in physical therapy, the 3 sets of 10. You tell them 3 sets of 10 and you turn around and they tell you they're done and ready for the next exercise. And I'm like, what do you mean? How? Like, that's not physically possible. They're like, no, I did my 30. No, 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 no. It's not 3 times 10 equals 30 all in a row. That would be endurance training, right? So, if you do that to a point, you're just training for endurance, not the specific adaptations of strength and rehab that we were going for. So that's not going to make you stronger. It's just going to fatigue you out, ruin all the future sets if you're going for the hypertrophy effect. So please, guys, take your rest time at least 1 minute for muscle growth. Otherwise, rep 1 of set 2 becomes rep 11 of set 1. Does that make sense? We don't want that. I sure hope that makes sense. And again, the goal of hypertrophy is to maximize muscle size via volume and time under tension, right? So we have a little higher volume than our strength training, but time under tension is everything here. What does that mean? Time under tension. Well, we talked about the concentric and eccentric portions of a lift in the last episode. Hypertrophy really, really emphasizes that stretch of the muscle, right? You want to break down the muscle, put it in its, furthest possible range of motion to its fullest extent. You want to emphasize form over everything for hypertrophy, okay? So forget the giant arch with the bench press, the leg drive, you know, simple changes change the goal of your training. If you're benching to get a really, really high bench for powerlifting, and I keep using bench as an example because it's very easy to talk about with the way you can adjust it, the way you can, adjust it for training goals. If you're going crazy arch, really, really hard leg drive, wedging yourself into the bench, got all these tricks, you're benching super wide, you're probably not targeting the pectoral muscles very specifically and effectively in terms of isolation and hypertrophy. You're just using your leverages to your advantage. You're moving the weight easier. It's better for overall, maybe like, systemic strength for that lift. But if your goal is hypertrophy, you want to kind of adjust some of those parameters. Okay, so less of an arch, put more stress on the actual pectoral muscles, make them work a little harder. Maybe you don't use the same grip as you do for a power bench, um, use the one that you feel more, right? This is about feeling. So the mind muscle connection, I'm sure you've heard about that. You want to be going like crazy when you do your hypertrophy training. You want to play around with the grip on a lift, the setup, the arch, the brace, whatever it may be for that lift until you feel it like crazy in your muscle. Like you want to feel the whole stretch, you want to feel the whole contraction, you want to feel that blood moving. You need to put your brain inside that muscle during the lift. So what I like to do, when I'm kind of learning mind muscle connection with new lifts I'm trying is I do it unilaterally first, which means just one side. So I'm going to use the bicep curl as an example because it's a really easy one, right? We always come back to it. Um, if you're doing a bicep curl, you're not feeling it too well because it'll happen time to time. You're like, what's happening? How come I'm not feeling a good contraction here? Use tactile cueing. Okay, so that's using your own sensory input from yourself. So take your opposite arm, your bicep curl with your left hand, right? Take your right hand and tap that left bicep, or even just hold a couple fingers on the bicep. It's going to force you to feel the contraction, gives you a much better sense of what you're doing. And I love this for people who say they can't feel back exercises. I feel that. Like a lot of back exercises tend to be harder to feel to get that mind muscle than some other things. People tend to have a harder time with back day. So take that opposite hand, do your lat pull downs with one arm instead of two, and cup the opposite lat with your hand. Cup the lat that's training with the arm that's not being used. It's going to help you tremendously. I promise you. Use tactile cueing when you're training for hypertrophy, and you'll feel that time under tension, that stretch, the shortening, the contraction. So use those tips. Next, from muscle endurance, our third goal, our third specificity of training. This one, you're going to look at a lot lower loads, higher reps. There's a trend here, right? There's a curve. When we go from strength to hypertrophy to endurance, volume is going up, 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 and intensity is going down, 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 down. Because we're at lower percentages of your 1 rep max, which means less taxing, less aggressive lifting, right? It's not as heavy, but we're doing it way more times over and over and over because you're developing that local muscular endurance. I used an example in the first episode talking about push ups, how doing a bunch of push ups is going to translate to better bench and vice versa. But that's because if you do a bunch of push ups, you're training the local muscular endurance of your pectoral muscles. You're not training to have a better bench press, better force output because the intensity is very, very low. And you know that because if you can do a bunch of reps, if the intensity, if it was super high, you'd probably only be able to do 1 or 2 push-ups. But most trained individuals could do somewhere around, the 20 to 30 to 40, even 50 plus, muscular endurance. Load needs to be equal to or less than, actually, I don't know why I said it in that order, less than or equal to 67% of your 1 rep max. So let's go back to the old bench example. You're benching 100 pounds for your 1 rep max. So 67% takes 67 pounds or less if you're going for endurance. And this is what I talked about kind of for like a warm up or a burnout. Take a lower percentage of your load, pump it out for a bunch of reps. Get that pump going, get some blood there, then you're ready for your workout, or use it as a burnout at the end. If that's kind of the last thing that you're doing. I love a good burnout. Good burnout's great. But if endurance is literally your goal, keep your training that way. Keep your working sets like that. So take 60%, 65% of your 1 rep max, punch it out for 12, 15, even up to 20 reps. Usually around, 15 to 20 is recommended for 2 to 3 sets. So you're not bleeding into hypertrophy goals. So if you think about it, let's do some simple math here, right? We're talking about volume. Well, volume, you're looking at sets times reps times load. Max strength, you're going to be kind of compensating with load for what you're not going to have in sets and reps. So maybe you do, your strength programming, a 5x5. So 5 times 5, that's 25 with 100 pounds, 2,500 pounds. That would be your volume for that, exercise. That would be your total volume. Now, all right, I might be slow at this because I don't do math very often. I should not have gone down this route. But now let's look at muscular endurance as a comparison. So now you're doing 50 pounds, 50% of your 1 rep max instead of 100. But you're going to do 3 sets of 20 instead of 5 sets of 5. So 20 times 3, that's 60, right? Times 50. So 3,000 would be your total volume for that session. Now, you see how you're getting two completely different numbers there for strength, for endurance? Excuse me. Strength was 2,500, but endurance was 3,000. So these are variables that can be manipulated in many ways, but it's really interesting to look at the actual metrics of what's going on here because you ended up with more total volume for that endurance training, but you probably felt way more fatigued with the strength training. So at the end of the day, this matters because you can't train for all three goals at once. So regardless of what you think, the body responds to specificity, the SAID principle, and most gym goers unknowingly program random lifting, kind of moderately heavy, moderately often, moderate reps, and well, guess what? Moderate results. So you want to match your training goal to the training stimulus. If you want to get stronger, train with high intensity, low reps, long rest. If you want to grow, get bigger, use moderate intensity, higher volume, shorter rest times. And if you want to improve your stamina, go light, go short, short rest times, and go long. So each one has its own fingerprint, its own training fingerprint, but your job is to align your plan with the one that you actually want. And a pro tip straight out of my guidebook, periodize it. If you've never heard of that word, we're going to talk about it in a later chapter. But if you're really good with strength, cycling through hypertrophy and endurance blocks can actually help your tissue resilience, your movement quality, and long-term gains. So it's helpful for every couple months to switch your overall programming goal. Even if strength is your goal for, let's say, the year, right, is to get stronger, get a bigger bench, bigger squat, get your numbers up. You should still cycle through a couple macro cycles of strength, hypertrophy, off and on. Because as you get stronger, you'll inevitably be able to lift heavier weights for the goal of hypertrophy, which gets your muscles bigger because you're moving more load. That cross-sectional area goes up, recruit more motor units. So, which in turn will make you stronger. It'll increase your power. So strength will feed into hypertrophy and vice versa. So build a strategic manipulation of volume and intensity over time. It's built by those principles. That's why Drew and I said you can't always rely on the same slap on weight, increased intensity to get progressive overload. You're going to have to manipulate other variables sometimes. And that's what you do when you hit a plateau. You find something you haven't changed recently and you change it. All right. So that's everything I wanted to talk about on endurance, hypertrophy, strength training, these different variables of volume versus intensity. So next, after a short break, we're going to come back with exercise selection. How should you order things? What should you pick? And how do you build the blueprint of your strength gains? All right, guys. So, coming back with some exercise selection here, and this one is really, really important. The first thing you want to get into, you're devising a game plan here, right? You can't just roll the dice and expect results. So you've got two broad categories of lifts. I mean, you can get away with any depth of this analysis, but we're trying to just stick to these two here, right? You've got your compound movements, like we talked about, your multi joint exercises, squat, deadlift, press, pull, and your accessory or isolation movements that will always, and I repeat, always come after your compound lifts. So these target specific muscles, the accessory lifts of functions like bicep curls, lateral raises, hip thrusts. When we think of the action of a single muscle, like literally, what is the exercise in its most basic form? What does the bicep do? Elbow flexion. What is a bicep curl? It is literally elbow flexion just with a weight. So if you're taking all that accessory work, you're just taking the action of a muscle, loading it with weight, and then doing it over and over and over. That's all the gym is. That's literally lifting. Just study anatomy, it becomes so simple. You realize that these movements that we do, we're just loading weight onto the normal action of a muscle. Yep, like that's how easy it is. So both are essential compounds and accessory lifts, but your program needs to be built around those compound lifts. That's the bread and butter of your lifts, the things that are going to make you stronger, the things that are going to progress you. They're going to increase that neural drive, teach you motor patterns that are essential for all your accessory lifts. But the compound lifts are so important. They also deliver the highest return on effort because you're recruiting more muscle fibers. Like we talked about, the general and the soldiers, recruiting those muscle fibers, you will get better at that with compound lifts because it demands more from your body. It builds coordination, it helps your muscles work together as a team, stimulates testosterone, growth hormone, mimics real life movement patterns. So basically, you get strong fast. They get you strong fast. You could sit there spamming machines all day, doing your accessories all you want. But if you don't have compound lifts at the core of your workouts, you're truly cheating your gains. I promise you. So let's talk about the foundation, the big four. We've got the squat, a hinge, a hip hinge, right? Both kind of components of leg day. And then a press, both horizontal and vertical. Well, so that screams to me push day. And then a pull. So just in general, like a pull, a row, a pull up, pull down, however you might want to look at that. So you've got your four essential compound movements: squat, hinge, press, pull. And these movements basically form the pillars of every single effective strength training program in the history of strength training. Seriously, just think about how essential those are to even, I'm sure you've all heard of a push pull legs, PPL, right? PPL routine is probably the most common split ever. And it happens to be the most effective split ever, in my very biased, humble opinion, because I've been doing it for the last 5 years and I've gotten fantastic results from it. Because why? It sticks to the basics. We do not need to overcomplicate things, guys. There's these stupid, fancy, crazy workouts you'll find everywhere on social media, taking what is supposed to be a simple foundational concept, like I said, the action of a muscle, and manipulating it in ways that are not, I mean, one, not necessary, and two, they require more setup and more cognitive demand when you could just be doing a simpler motion for more of a result, right? Why work harder? Just smarter, not harder. That's what we go for here. So these movements form the pillars of your effective program. Let's think about the contents of a push-pull legs program, right? Push, there's your press, horizontal and vertical, covers both of those. And I would even argue like the pushing of your arms, right? Triceps, that's a push, both upward and downward. If you're doing overhead tricep work, any kind of pull down tricep work, which are the two variations that you want to hit the heads of your tricep, you're going to be doing a lot of pushing. And another thing, the hinge, deadlifts, RDLs, good mornings, the hip hinge. You need to learn that. You're hinging in lots of different movements. That's an essential movement pattern to learn. And the hinge goes with leg day. Squat, another leg day motion. So now we've covered, pushing legs. You do squats all the time: goblet squat, Cossack squat, regular squat, back squat, front squat. There's a million different variations of squats. And all of those are essential to your leg day. What do they all root in? The squat, the basic movement pattern of a squat. And then you've got your pull. It is literally called pull day. Okay. So like it couldn't get any more specific than that. What do you do on a pull day? You just pull a bunch of shit. You pull down stuff, you horizontally pull stuff, you pull up on stuff. You pull with your biceps, you curl, you pull this, you pull that, you rear delts. That's why we consider a pull day, because everything is a quote unquote pulling action. of the muscles, whereas push day, you're pushing everything. It's all pushing things away from you. So you're pulling things toward you on a pull day. Pull, pull, pull. So squat, hinge, press, pull. That's your bread and butter. That's all you've got to stick to make an effective routine. And then when you support it with the accessories, you're golden. So you can use these to address weak links, your accessory lifts, improve movement quality, build volume for hypertrophy, and of course, reduce the risk of injury because the more stiff you get your tendons, the stronger you get your muscles, your accessory muscles in particular, the easier the compound lifts become because of that stabilization aspect. A lot of the times your compound lifts, yes, you have your primary movers, your agonists in your bench press, like your chest, your triceps, but then you also have your stabilizers in every compound lift. Muscles that don't actually work, primarily, but they are working in tandem with the primary movers. And you need to have those stabilizers. All those accessory lifts are what makes those accessory muscles stronger, makes you more stable overall. So yes, the compound lifts are the best, quote unquote important part of your lifts to continue to progress and build and grow, but these accessories are absolutely necessary. They just need to come after because you will fatigue throughout your workout and you need the primary driver of your workout to be progressive overload on the compound lifts. It means so much more for you to be able to get in gains on your bench, squat, deadlift, rows, press. Like I said, all those lifts that fall into the category of squat, hinge, press, pull, you need those to go up way more than you need your accessories to go up in order for systemic growth to happen. So I would rather you guys go in there and overload the crap out of your squats and your bench and get super, super fatigued and then move on to your accessories and maybe not PR and your, I don't know, like lateral raises or bicep curls or tricep extension. It doesn't matter. You've got the volume in for the accessories. That's all that matters. You're targeting those isolation muscles that are going to help you with your compounds when you loop back into it the next day. It's all a feedback mechanism. So think stuff like rear delt flies, single leg RDLs, that rehab inspired stuff. You begin to round out your system, those little finishing touches on your workout. They are essential. They are, of course, essential, but those are not the ones you should be overloading with primary bias. Overload is for compound lifts, okay? We don't try to overload every day on rear delt flies or something like that. We don't overload on lateral raises. We challenge ourselves, right? We work in that 8 to 12 rule, but those are very specific, smaller muscles. So think about the cross sectional size of muscles compared to, maybe the quadricep compartment or hamstrings, for example. Like, do you think your rear delt or your infraspinatus or something is anywhere near the size of your quad and can handle the same kind of force transmission? No. So size principle is important here also. Like coaching tip here, right? Hello, movement over muscle. Train movements, not just muscles. Train actions, movements. Muscle targeting matters, but movement competency like squatting well, hinging well, pressing without pain, that is where your long-term strength and durability is built because it's the anchor of everything. At the end of the day, why do we train? We train to be stronger. Why are we training to be stronger? So that we can move more functionally as human beings. Tasks become easier in our day-to-day life, right? I mean, you see it all the time. Like, yeah, it's cool to lift more weight in the gym, but seeing how it translates to real life is always such a payoff when you're the guy that everyone calls to pick up boxes and help them move, whatever it may be. Like, you might become that person who's functionally strong and capable. It makes your life so much easier when you can go do grocery trips in one run, 3 bags or 30 bags, I mean, like 200 pounds worth of groceries, and you just bring all the stuff upstairs. You're so strong. You built that foundation. That one tripper, the classic one tripper, it's functional. I mean, my PT brain's kicking in here, but functional, the hinge, the squat, you better believe you're going to thank yourself in 60 years when you can hinge and squat well and you're still able to pick things up off the floor with no back pain because you know proper mechanics and you've trained the motor programs. You've trained the form, you've got it down, and your body remembers it and your body replicates it. It is also important for functionality and longevity. So do not sleep on your compound lifts, guys. Please don't. And understand the order of exercise matters. So compounds first, then move on to your accessories. Overload those compounds and then get the volume in on the accessories. All right, it's time for chapter 6, frequency and recovery. Really, really good one to round this out today. So, how gains happen between your workouts and even between your sets. And here's the part where most lifters ignore. You don't grow when you train, you grow when you recover. So, training stimulates what needs to happen for growth and recovery. That's the stimulus, but it's useless without the recovery. So, training, you're breaking the body down, right? But recovery builds it back and stronger. So if you're not allowing yourself proper recovery, you're just breaking yourself down and causing all this pain and suffering for no reason. You want to become stronger, right? So if you're constantly lifting without adequate rest, you're just spinning your wheels, man. You're backsliding into overtraining, fatigue, injury. This is when injuries start to pile up. This is when you start to feel fatigued and sore, and you got joint pain all the time. You feel like you're not progressing. You hit a plateau, and you're wondering, man, what's wrong? I feel like crap. I thought I'd feel better for going to the gym. Slow down, man. You're overtraining. That's all right. So this starts with not resting properly. I guarantee you 99% of the time overtraining is going to come from inadequate rest over working so hard in the gym that you've somehow actually physically overtrained yourself, right? So, how often should you train each muscle group? Let's talk about some simple rules you can follow in terms of frequency. Very practical advice here. According to the NSCA, and of course, a lot of modern literature, 2 to 3 times a week per muscle group leads to better hypertrophy and strength than 1 time a week splits. So, this is why I like the push pull legs variation because push pull legs, right? 1, 2, 3, that's 3 days. So, how many times can you fit that into a week? Two maximum. So you can do 2 cycles of an entire push pull legs routine split and still get a rest day, a full active rest day. That's pretty optimal. I would say that's what I run. Me personally, if you want to know my split, like yeah, I've been doing this for a long time, but no, I keep it simple. Please keep it simple. It'll save you so much time and energy and stress. I've tried, to do the fancy stuff you see online, change my split, do the fad stuff and follow other people. It never works better than sticking to this. And that's because the science backs it. Now that I know the science, I understand why it's so simple, but it's so nice, right? So 2 or 3 times a week per muscle group, better hypertrophy, better strength. And guess what I've gotten? Better hypertrophy and better strength doing those things. So if you're doing a push twice a week, you're hitting your chest, triceps, shoulders twice a week, a push day, right? If you're doing a pull day twice a week, you're hitting your back and biceps twice a week. A leg day twice a week, you got your quads and your hammies. You can do anterior, posterior chain. So how do you structure this? Well, think maybe you could do 2 times in a week, push pull legs, push pull legs. Please, gentlemen, hit legs. That needs to be part of your routine. No bro splits, please, no bro splits. Um, but you can run PPL with a rest day on the seventh. You could do push pull legs, rest, and keep doing that rest day every fourth day. No matter how you structure it, it's still going to give you adequate rest. I just feel that more veteran gym goers will go with that 6 days on in a row, 1 day off kind of routine. It's better to start with the push pull legs, rest, repeat. So that's what I tend to stick to. I can just train more often. I'm a little less. Well, I will say I'm kind of addicted. Right, it's hard for me to take a rest day. That's why I like those 6 in a row. But it's very easy to structure those things to make sure that you're getting in everything you need to for training frequency, ample amount of sets, reps for specific muscle groups. It is way more effective than full body training 5 times a week, which is another approach that people take, which is fine. It's fine. It is something, especially if you're training for just kind of like general conditioning or keeping yourself, in general shape. But if your goal is to specifically get hypertrophy effects out of all the muscles in your body, push pull legs is probably the best way for you to format things. In my professional opinion, you get adequate rest time between, each muscle group. Let's think about it. Let's say Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday is your first run of push pull legs. So then Thursday, Friday, Saturday would be your second run of push pull legs with a rest on Sunday. This is my exact split. Okay. This is what I do. So Monday, you're going to be doing push, chest, try, shoulders, and you won't hit any of those muscles again until Thursday. You might use them as accessories in other lifts, but that means you have 2 full days before you specifically target those muscles again. They get all that time to recover. Now on Tuesday, you're still training, but you're doing back and biceps. So your body might systemically be tired or fatigued from doing, that Monday push day, but those local muscles are going to be ready, recharged, ready to go. Every day you come in the gym, the specific muscles you're hitting that day will be ready to fire. And that is why I love that split. So now, pivoting a little bit here, let's talk about sleep, right? And I'm going to say this stuff, even though I rarely do it because I'm so freaking busy all the time. I really need to do better on this. So this one goes out to you, Nate. You need 7 to 9 hours per night, pretty much. That's a safe rule and not the kind interrupted by scrolling on your phone, barking dogs, crying babies, stuff like that, which happens, right? But listen, growth hormone is released during sleep, deep sleep. Without it, your body can't repair muscle, replenish your nervous system output. Why is this important, right? Well, I talked about CNS, central nervous system, kind of taxing it with those heavy strength lifts, heavy compounds, those lifts that really, really take a toll on your body in the beginning of the workout. If you're doing them properly, all that, you will not see that recovery without decent sleep. You need to repair the muscle and replenish your nervous system. You're going to feel taxed, tired, lethargic, all that all the time if you're not getting proper sleep. But trying to do a 6-day heavy strength routine, it is not going to happen if you don't get proper rest. Your program can be absolutely perfect, but if your recovery sucks, your results will be straight up garbage. Recovery, if it isn't optimal, then the other 23 hours of the day, it makes or breaks your gains. So, we're going to talk about nutrition and a lot of other factors on the show that are going to make or break your gains. But at the end of the day, the most simple one that we can discuss is proper sleep. And I'm sure that I'll have guest speakers on here in the future to discuss, specifics of sleep and the science behind it. But really, all you need to know is that if you're shorting yourself adequate sleep, you're doing much, much, much more damage to potential gains than you think. All the metabolism that happens in the middle of the night, all that protein synthesis, you need that to happen for an ample amount of time. If you want to maximize your gains, and right, this is what the entire show is about, maximizing the gains. Come on, guys, go to sleep. Stop scrolling on your phones. If you're watching this or listening to this right now at 2 in the morning, turn it off, finish it in the morning. So, something I recommend is get off your phone about an hour before you plan to go to bed, and also stop eating about an hour at least before you go to bed. It'll just kind of keep everything in a nice little cycle, get your body ready for shutdown. It'll start to recognize when it's night time, not to screw around. It kind of programs an off button for you. And then once you get going to bed at a consistent time every day, you'll find yourself able to wake up at a more consistent time as your body gets on a bit of a rhythm, a cycle. And then you get to a point where you do it for a couple weeks and suddenly you don't need an alarm anymore. And you find your body waking you up at the same time that your alarm is set for on its own. It's magic. Trust me, it works. And it's really, really useful sometimes, saving you from being late for work, for example. And it's really freaking annoying other times when you want to sleep in on the weekend and your body is just like, hey, wake up, wake up. But that's when you know you've gotten yourself in a good rhythm and you're getting adequate sleep because your body's ready to get up. It tells you, hey, like, let's get up, man. We don't need an alarm. Come on, you got enough sleep. Let's get started. We're feeling good. We're ready to go. Let's go work out. So, that's when you know you're sleeping well, when you get that steady rhythm and you don't really need alarms or snooze buttons to wake yourself up and get out of bed because you wake up feeling, I won't say refreshed, but you're not feeling terrible. So, compromise, right? Sometimes it's just about waking up and not feeling like a piece of crap. So, remember, guys, training breaks down the body, recovery builds it back stronger. Couldn't get more simple than that. And I know I'm drawing very simple, ideas here today. These are foundational building blocks, though, that are going to take you the full mile. If you focus on the simple stuff, small wins every single day, get your sleep right, get your eating right, program properly with specific goals in mind, you're going to see a lot more gains. And if you keep hopping around, playing around with accessory exercises of different loads, different intensities, different volumes, just take a step back, make it simple. Please make it simple because making it simple makes it easy. And when things are easy, we adhere to them, right? So that is all I have on sleep and recovery and frequency. But one more thing that I want to add is that recovery happens within your workouts also, right? So I touched on rest time between sets. It is so, so important. Okay. I can get into the anatomy of everything with your phosphocreatine stores, your ATP energy sources, when they come into play, why they're useful. But really, what's important for you to know is that you will not adequately perform set to set if you're not taking the rest time in between sets. Think of a battery, right, that you have in your phone, little battery display. You recharge your battery by not doing anything within your workouts, right? That's how muscles work. So when you're working out, you finish a set, sit there and do nothing, right? Maybe shake it out, do some stretches, I don't know, whatever, dance, sing, but think of your battery as depleted. And in order for that battery to recharge back to its full capacity, you're going to need to stop and rest. So if you do your first set and let's say you start off at 100% battery, maybe you put yourself down to 20% by the end of that set. Well, it's not going to recharge back to 100% the second time, but you might get it to like 90, 95, but that will not happen if you don't rest. So rest if you're doing hypertrophy training. Please take your minute, get yourself back up to 90%. Now, you're up to that second set. Maybe you burn yourself down to 15% battery. Okay, well, recover. Maybe you'll get it back to 85, 90. you're going to start seeing diminishing results from how much you can actually recover from the rest as the workout goes on and you start to fatigue. But trust me, you need it. You need it. Strength training, especially. By God, please, if you're going to do heavy lifts, 5x5 compounds, stuff like that, and you're not taking at least 2 minutes between your sets, forget about it, okay? Your set's going to look like 5, 4, 3, 1, nothing. If you want it to look like 5, 5, 5, 5, 5, you better be darn sure to take your rest or you're going to sacrifice a lot of volume from excessive fatigue. All right. And that is my spiel, right? That is my rant for today, guys. I think I hit all the topics I wanted to on these 3 chapters. They are just so important. I could talk on them for hours, but I'm trying to be really filter things down to the most important practical stuff for you guys so that you can listen to these episodes and walk away feeling like you learned, but you also have a lot to apply. So please go apply this to your workouts and let me know how it felt. Let me know how it worked for you. All right, guys, that is a wrap for today's episode of PT Cubed, where we break down things strength, rehab, and performance always. I appreciate all of you for tuning in. If you got value from this, please do me a favor. Hit that follow button, leave a quick rating and review, and share this episode with anyone that you think is ready to take their training, rehab, or health to the next level. If you want to dive deeper and get the most out of all this, head over to pt³.com. That's ptcubed.com. That is where you'll find my complete guidebooks on strength training, injury prevention, nutrition, all designed to help you perform at your best. And if you've got questions, feedback, or just want to connect, shoot me an email at natekaram@pt³.com. That is natekaram@ptcubed.com. I love hearing from you guys and always do my best to point you in the right direction, whether it's training, rehab, or just building a stronger mindset. You can also follow along on Instagram at PT³ for daily tips, coaching insights, and a behind-the-scenes look at how I help people just like you stay strong, stay moving, stay dialed in. So thanks again for listening, guys, and as always, strength, rehab, performance. I'll catch you in the next one. Peace.